I stared at my phone screen and my heart began pounding so hard it felt like someone had placed a crushing weight directly on my chest. The message was still there, glowing back at me like some kind of sick joke I couldn't escape from. Papa said. 3-year-old Max had somehow managed to unlock my phone, navigate through my work applications, and send those 2 words to Austin Cross, my boss, the CEO of the entire company, the man I'd been carefully avoiding eye contact with for the past 6 months. My hands were trembling uncontrollably now. Austin never replied to anyone after business hours, and he certainly wouldn't respond to a random text from an employee's toddler. I should have felt relieved by that thought, but exactly 20 minutes later, my doorbell rang with an insistent buzz that made my stomach drop. I walked slowly to the door, my legs feeling like they might give out at any moment, and pulled it open. There he stood on my doorstep, looking impossibly out of place in my rundown apartment building. Austin Cross was wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent, holding a teddy bear that was almost as tall as Max in one hand and a paper bag of takeout food in the other. His sharp green eyes immediately scanned my face with an intensity that made me want to hide, and I knew, God, I absolutely knew, that he could see I'd been crying. The evidence was probably written all over my puffy eyes and red-rimmed lids. You didn't answer my calls, he said, his voice low and deep, carrying an almost accusatory tone that made my breath hitch. I blinked rapidly, trying to process his words. He had called? I hadn't even heard my phone ring. Austin, this is a mistake, I stammered, my words tumbling out in a rush. Max just got hold of my phone somehow. He didn't mean anything by it. I'm so sorry. Without waiting for an invitation or permission, Austin stepped across the threshold into my apartment, and suddenly the already cramped space felt even smaller with his imposing presence filling it. Your son said you were sad, he stated matter-of-factly, setting the enormous teddy bear down carefully on my worn couch. So I came here. The simplicity of his statement hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe properly. This was the same man who had once fired someone during a board meeting without even blinking. The same man whose cold demeanor and ruthless business tactics were legendary throughout the entire office. Everyone feared him, respected him from a distance, and tried never to cross him. And now he was standing in my tiny living room because a 3-year-old had sent him 2 words in a text message. Max peeked out from behind my legs where he'd been hiding, his big brown eyes growing wide with recognition and excitement. Big man, he squealed happily, reaching his small arms up toward Austin with the complete trust that only children possess. And Austin, the intimidating, untouchable CEO Austin Cross, actually crouched down to Max's level and let my son grab onto his expensive silk tie with sticky fingers. Hey there, little buddy, he said softly, and I swear something inside my chest cracked and splintered. I had never seen him smile like that before. Not once in all the months I'd worked at the company. His whole face transformed, became warmer somehow, almost approachable. Why are you here? I managed to ask, my voice breaking embarrassingly on the last word. Austin stood back up to his full height, and his gaze locked onto mine with an intensity that made the air between us feel thick and charged with something I didn't want to name. Because, he said, taking a step closer to me, then another, until he was so close I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely him. I don't like the idea of you being sad, Parker. My name on his lips sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. At work he always called me by my last name in that professional, distant way. But here, in my home, with my son between us, he'd used my first name like it meant something. Like I meant something. I opened my mouth to respond, to say something, anything, but no words would come out. Max tugged on Austin's pant leg, completely oblivious to the tension crackling in the room. You stay? My son asked with that heartbreaking hopefulness that children have before the world teaches them disappointment. You play trucks? Austin looked down at Max, and something in his expression softened even more. Yeah, I can stay for a while, he agreed, and Max let out a delighted shriek that would probably have my neighbors complaining tomorrow. I watched frozen in place, as Austin shrugged out of his suit jacket and draped it over the back of my kitchen chair before settling onto the floor with Max like it was the most natural thing in the world. The CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation, sitting cross-legged on my stained carpet, making vroom vroom noises as Max crashed a plastic truck into his knee. The scene was so surreal I wondered if I was having some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Maybe I'd fallen asleep at my desk and this was all a very weird dream. But no, the teddy bear was real. The takeout bag was definitely real based on the amazing smell wafting from it, and Austin was absolutely impossibly real. You must have better things to do, I said quietly, finally finding my voice again. Important CEO things. Business deals. Whatever it is you do when you're not at the office. Austin glanced up at me, and there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite read. Nothing more important than this, he replied simply, turning his attention back to Max, who was now lining up all his toy cars in a precise row. The casual certainty in his statement made my throat feel tight. I didn't know what to do with this version of Austin Cross, the man who showed up at my door because my son said I was sad. The man who was now apparently content to spend his evening playing with a toddler instead of doing whatever wealthy, powerful men did with their free time. Papa sad. Because money, Max announced suddenly with the brutal honesty of a 3-year-old who didn't understand he was supposed to keep family problems private. My face flushed hot with embarrassment. Austin's expression shifted, became more serious, more focused. Is that right? He asked, his tone careful. I wanted to disappear into the floor. Max, why don't you go get your dinosaur book? I suggested desperately, needing a moment without my son revealing more of our struggles to my boss. Max scrambled up and ran toward his room, leaving Austin and me alone in a silence that felt loaded with unspoken questions. Austin stood up gracefully, brushing invisible dust off his expensive pants. Parker, he started, but I cut him off quickly. Don't, I said, shaking my head. Please don't do whatever this is. I don't need pity and I definitely don't need charity from my boss. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That's not what this is, he said firmly, taking another step into my personal space. Then what is it? I challenged, crossing my arms defensively across my chest. Austin held my gaze, unwavering and intense. It's me caring about someone who matters, he said quietly. It's me not being able to stay away even though I probably should. And just like that, my entire world tilted sideways. I thought he would leave after that confession hung in the air between us like smoke. But Austin didn't leave. Instead, he stayed planted on my couch, with Max practically glued to his side, and I stood awkwardly in my own kitchen trying to process what was happening to my carefully controlled life. My mind was racing with questions I was too afraid to ask out loud. What did he mean by caring about someone who matters? Why couldn't he stay away? And most terrifyingly, why did part of me not want him to? You really didn't need to come, I said again, though my voice lacked any real conviction this time. Austin was absently running his fingers through Max's hair as my son babbled about his preschool adventures, and he looked up at me with those penetrating green eyes. I know I didn't need to, he acknowledged simply. No elaborate explanation, no justification. Just those 5 words that somehow made everything more complicated because they implied want instead of obligation. I busied myself putting away Max's scattered toys, needing something, anything to do with my hands so I wouldn't have to keep looking at the domestic scene unfolding on my couch. The CEO of Cross Industries, probably worth more money than I could comprehend, sitting in my shabby apartment like he belonged there. But I could feel his attention on me even when I wasn't looking directly at him. It was like a physical touch, tracking my movements around the small space, making me hyper-aware of every gesture I made. When did you last eat? Austin's question came out of nowhere, cutting through my thoughts. I froze mid-reach for a plastic action figure, my hand hovering in the air. I'm not sure. I lied poorly. Had something at lunch, I think. The truth was I hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Money was incredibly tight this month. Max's daycare had raised their rates again and I'd had to choose between groceries and keeping the lights on. My son always came first, which meant I came last. Austin stood up with fluid grace and walked over to the kitchen table, beginning to unpack the takeout he'd brought. Sit, he commanded, and it definitely wasn't a request or suggestion. I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him I didn't need his charity or his concern, wanted to maintain some shred of my pride. But honestly, I was exhausted, bone-deep tired in a way that went beyond just physical fatigue. So I sat. The food was incredible. The kind of high-quality cuisine I could never afford even if I wanted to splurge. Italian. Fresh. Obviously expensive. We ate in relative silence except for Max's cheerful chatter about everything and nothing. And for just a moment I let myself pretend this was normal, that we were something we absolutely weren't, that Austin belonged in this picture. "Why have you been avoiding me at work?" His question sliced through the comfortable quiet like a knife. I nearly choked on my pasta, coughing and reaching for my water glass. "What?" I managed to get out. Austin set his fork down deliberately and leaned back in his chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "For 6 months. Parker, you've barely looked at me. You leave meetings early whenever possible. You take the stairs when you see me near the elevator. I want to know why." My heart was hammering so hard I was certain he could hear it across the table. Because the truth was dangerous. The truth was that I'd started noticing things I had no business noticing. Like how his jaw tightened when he was stressed during presentation, or the way he unconsciously tapped his pen against his desk when he was thinking through a problem, or how his rare genuine smiles transformed his entire face. And it had all started at that company event 6 months ago when he'd helped Max find his lost shoe and my son had looked up at him with complete adoration. "I just didn't want to be a bother," I mumbled, focusing intently on my plate. Austin leaned forward, and suddenly the space between us felt electric. "You could never be a bother to me." His voice had dropped lower, more intimate somehow, and something in my chest squeezed painfully. This was dangerous territory we were treading into. And I knew it. He was my boss. This couldn't happen. Whatever this was. "Austin," I started, but he interrupted me. "I noticed things too, Parker," he said quietly. "Like how you always bring homemade lunch but never eat all of it. How you wear the same 3 shirts in rotation because you're spending your money on Max instead of yourself. How you stay late at the office not because you're behind on work, but because the building is warm and you're trying to save on heating bills at home." My face burned with humiliation. He'd noticed all of that? I thought I'd been so careful, so discreet about my struggles. "You don't know what you're talking about," I said defensively, even though we both knew it was a lie. Max had wandered over to his toy box and was now building something elaborate with blocks, giving us a semblance of privacy. Austin reached across the table and before I could pull away, his hand covered mine. The touch sent electricity racing up my arm. "Let me help," he said simply. I yanked my hand back like I'd been burned. "No. Absolutely not. I don't need handouts and I definitely don't need pity from you." Something flashed across his face, frustration maybe, or hurt. "It's not pity," he insisted. "Then what is it?" I demanded, my voice rising slightly. "Why are you really here, Austin? Why do you care about any of this?" He stood up abruptly, and for a second I thought he was finally going to leave, going to walk out and we could pretend this bizarre evening never happened. But instead he walked around the table until he was standing right in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "Because I can't stop thinking about you," he admitted, his voice rough. "Because I've been trying to keep my distance for months and it's not working. Because seeing that text from Max tonight gave me an excuse to do what I've been wanting to do, which is make sure you're okay." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The most powerful man in our company was standing in my kitchen essentially confessing that he had feelings for me, and I had absolutely no idea how to process that information. "This is crazy," I whispered. "You're my boss. There are rules about this kind of thing. Power dynamics and HR policies and—" "I know," Austin cut me off. "I know all of that, Parker. Do you think I haven't been fighting this? But I'm tired of pretending I don't care when I do." Max's voice suddenly piped up from across the room. "Papa, Austin staying for bedtime story?" The innocent question broke the tension slightly, and Austin's expression softened as he looked at my son. "If your papa says it's okay," he replied. Max turned his hopeful eyes to me and I knew I was completely doomed, because how could I say no when my son was looking at me like that? And Austin was standing so close I could feel the warmth radiating from him. And everything in my life felt like it was shifting into something new and terrifying and maybe, possibly wonderful. Austin stayed for the bedtime story. And then somehow, inexplicably, he stayed after Max fell asleep too. We migrated to the couch, sitting at opposite ends at first, maintaining some illusion of appropriate distance. But the silence between us was loaded with everything we hadn't said, everything we were both too afraid to acknowledge out loud. I kept thinking about his words in the kitchen, the raw honesty in his voice when he'd admitted to thinking about me. Nobody had ever looked at me the way Austin was looking at me now, like I was something precious and worth fighting for instead of just another responsibility to shoulder alone. "Tell me about Max's father," Austin said eventually, breaking the quiet. It wasn't really a question, more like an invitation to share if I wanted to. I pulled my knees up to my chest, making myself smaller. "Not much to tell," I said, aiming for casual and probably missing by a mile. "We were together for about a year. When I told him I was pregnant, he said he wasn't ready to be a father. He signed away his parental rights before Max was even born and left town." Austin's expression darkened with barely contained anger. "He abandoned you," he stated flatly. "Both of you." I shrugged, trying to pretend it didn't still hurt after all this time. "His loss, right? That's what everyone always says, and it is. Max is amazing and he's missing out on knowing this incredible kid. But it also made everything harder than it needed to be." I paused, surprised at my own openness. I never talked about this with anyone. I had to drop out of college, moved into this place because it was what I could afford. Started working entry-level positions wherever would take me. Some days I feel like I'm drowning, like I'm one emergency away from everything falling apart. But Max deserves better than that fear, so I keep going. Austin had shifted closer during my confession without me even noticing. Now there were only a few inches separating us on the couch. "You're doing an incredible job," he said with such conviction it made my throat tight. "Max is lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," I corrected quietly. "He's the best thing that ever happened to me, even if the circumstances weren't ideal." We sat there for a moment, and I could feel something shifting between us. The air felt different, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. "Can I ask you something?" I ventured, needing to understand what was happening here. Austin nodded. "Why me? You could have anyone. You're successful, powerful, probably have people throwing themselves at you constantly. So why does a broke single dad working in your accounts department matter to you?" Austin turned to face me fully, and the intensity in his gaze made my heart race. "Do you want the truth?" he asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I noticed you on your first day at the company," he admitted. "You came into that orientation meeting 15 minutes early with Max's drawing in your folder, the one with the stick figures and hearts. You'd forgotten to take it out before work. When you realized during the presentation, you smiled at it before tucking it away, and I thought, there's someone who loves something more than they're afraid of anything." I was stunned into silence. That had been over a year ago, long before I'd started consciously avoiding him. "You remember that?" I asked incredulously. "I remember everything about you, Parker," he said simply. "The way you bite your lip when you're concentrating on spreadsheets. How you always thank the cleaning staff by name. That you keep a photo of Max on your desk but hide it when clients come to meetings. Because you don't want them to think you're unprofessional. You're kind and hard-working and you never complain even when you have every right to." Each observation felt like a caress, like he'd been paying attention to me in ways I never imagined. "I started avoiding you because I was scared," I confessed before I could stop myself. "Scared of exactly this. Of feeling something I shouldn't feel. Wanting something I can't have. You're my boss, Austin. This is complicated in about 100 different ways." "I know it's complicated," Austin acknowledged. "I've been fighting with myself about this for months. But tonight when I got that text from Max, I couldn't stay away anymore. I had to make you were okay, and once I was here I realized I don't want to keep pretending I don't care." He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and cupped my face gently with one hand. His palm was warm against my cheek. "So here's what I'm proposing," he continued, his voice soft but steady. "Let me take you to dinner. A real date, away from work, away from all the complications, just you and me, getting to know each other without the weight of boss and employee hanging over us. And then we can figure out the rest from there." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could feel it. "What about Max?" I asked, my practical side kicking in even as my emotions were spiraling. "What about the office? Austin's thumb brushed across my cheekbone, effectively silencing my spiral of worries. "We'll figure it out," he promised. "I'm not asking you to have all the answers right now, Parker. I'm just asking for a chance. I should have said no. The smart thing, the safe thing, would have been to put distance between us and pretend this strange, intense evening never happened. But I was so tired of being smart and safe. So tired of doing everything alone. And the way Austin was looking at me made me feel seen in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Okay, I whispered. One date. The smile that spread across Austin's face was absolutely devastating. Yeah? He asked, like he couldn't quite believe I'd agreed. Yeah, I confirmed, feeling myself smile back despite my nervousness. But if this goes badly, I'm blaming Max for starting all of this with that text. Austin laughed, an actual genuine laugh that transformed his usually serious expression completely. Deal. Though I'm planning to thank Max personally for his excellent timing. We sat there on my couch, his hands still cradling my face, and for the first time in years I let myself feel hopeful about something beyond just surviving to the next day. Maybe this was reckless. Maybe we were making a mistake that would complicate both our lives beyond repair. But maybe, just maybe, it would be worth it. I should probably go, Austin said eventually, though he made no move to actually leave. It's late, and you have work tomorrow. So do you, I pointed out. You're literally my boss. If I'm late, that's your problem. He grinned. Guess I'll have to give you a pass then. He stood up reluctantly, and I walked him to the door. Before leaving, Austin turned back one more time. This thing between us, he said seriously. I want you to know I'm taking it seriously. This isn't just curiosity or some fleeting attraction. When I commit to something, to someone, I'm all in. The declaration should have scared me. Instead, it filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. Good to know, I managed to say past the lump in my throat. Austin reached out and squeezed my hand once before stepping into the hallway. I'll call you tomorrow about that date, he promised. I watched him walk away, and once my door was closed, I leaned against it and let out a long, shaky breath. What had I just agreed to? And why did it feel like my entire life was about to change? The following weeks blurred together in a way that felt almost dreamlike. Austin became a regular fixture in our lives, showing up with dinner some evenings, stopping by just to play with Max on others, offering help with everything from fixing my broken cabinet door to reviewing Max's preschool applications. We existed in this strange undefined space, clearly more than friends, but nothing officially labeled or acknowledged. Max had become completely attached, asking every single morning if Austin would be visiting that day. The pure joy on my son's face whenever Austin walked through the door was undeniable and beautiful. But underneath my own happiness, fear was growing roots. The closer I got to Austin, the more terrified I became of losing him. Of this all falling apart and having to explain to Max why the man he'd grown to love wasn't coming around anymore. It was a Friday evening when everything shifted again. Austin arrived with Thai food this time, but something was different about his demeanor. He seemed uncharacteristically nervous, which was an emotion I'd never witnessed in him before. After dinner, while Max was contentedly playing with building blocks in his room, Austin turned to face me with an expression of serious determination. "Parker, there's something I need to talk to you about," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made my stomach drop instantly. This was it, I thought with rising panic. This was the moment he'd tell me this had all been too much, that he couldn't keep doing this complicated dance we'd been performing. Yes? I managed to get out, bracing myself for the inevitable disappointment. Austin leaned forward, his green eyes intense and focused entirely on me. "I want to take you on a proper date," he said firmly. "An actual, official date. Dinner at a nice restaurant. Maybe a movie after. Whatever you'd like to do. Just the two of us." I blinked at him in confusion, my brain struggling to catch up with what he was actually saying versus what I'd been expecting. "A date?" I repeated stupidly. A small, almost shy smile crossed his face, an expression that made him look younger somehow, more vulnerable. "Yes, a real date. I understand the situation is complicated with work and everything else, but I want to take that step with you. If you're willing to take it with me." I wanted to say yes immediately. Every part of me was screaming to agree without hesitation. But the fear was still there, whispering doubt. "What if it doesn't work out?" I asked quietly. "What if we try this and it falls apart and then everything becomes awkward and uncomfortable?" Austin reached across the space between us and took my hand in his thumb tracing gentle circles on my skin. Then we'll handle it like adults," he said simply. "But Parker, I need you to understand something. I'm not here because of some fleeting curiosity or temporary attraction. I'm here with you because I genuinely want to be. This isn't an obligation or an experiment. I'm serious about exploring what this could become between us." His words, spoken with such raw sincerity, made my eyes burn with unshed tears. Nobody had ever spoken to me like that before, with such honest intention. "Okay," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Yes, I'd like that." The smile that spread across Austin's face was absolutely radiant, transforming his usually composed features into something open and joyful. "Yeah?" he asked, as if he couldn't quite believe I'd agreed. "Yeah," I confirmed, feeling my own smile growing. "Let's do this." Our first official date happened the following Saturday. Austin had arranged for his sister to babysit Max, a detail that touched me deeply because it meant he'd been planning this, talking to his family about us. We went to a small Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place with dim lighting, candles on every table, and soft jazz playing in the background. Austin wore a navy suit without a tie, the top button of his shirt undone, looking effortlessly elegant yet more relaxed than I'd ever seen him at the office. We talked for hours, really talked, about everything we'd never had the chance to discuss properly. He told me about growing up with two sisters who'd tormented him mercilessly, about losing his father young and having to step up as the man of the family, about building his company from almost nothing through sheer determination and countless sleepless nights. I shared things I rarely told anyone, about my own childhood bouncing between foster homes, about finally getting adopted at 14 by a couple who'd shown me what family could mean, about losing them both in a car accident right before I'd met Max's father, about how being a parent had given me purpose when I'd felt completely lost. "You're an incredible father," Austin said at one point, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Max is fortunate to have someone who loves him so completely." I shook my head, feeling emotion. "I'm the fortunate one. He saved me in ways I can't fully explain. Without him, I don't know where I'd be right now." Austin's expression softened with understanding. "That's what real love does. It transforms us into better versions of ourselves." The depth of feeling in his words made my heart race. After dinner, Austin drove me home, and we sat in his car outside my apartment building, neither of us quite ready for the evening to end. The streetlights cast shadows across his face as he turned to look at me. "I had a really good time tonight," he said, and there was something almost vulnerable in his tone. "I did too," I replied honestly. "Thank you for this, Austin. For everything." He shifted closer, and I could see the question in his eyes, the hesitation about whether he should make a move. "So I made the decision for both of us." I leaned in and kissed him, really kissed him, for the first time since that night on my couch. But this was different. This was a choice made in the clear light of intention rather than the confusion of unexpected emotion. His lips were soft against mine, his hand coming up to cup the back of my neck, and everything else faded away except the feeling of being exactly where I was supposed to be. When we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Austin rested his forehead against mine. "I've wanted to do that all evening," he admitted. "What stopped you?" I asked with a soft laugh. "Fear of rushing you," he answered honestly. "Fear of pushing too hard and scaring you away. You're important to me, Parker. More important than I think you realize." His words settled warm in my chest. "You're not going to scare me away," I promised. "I'm done running from this. From us." Austin kissed me again, softer this time, gentler, like a promise being sealed. When I finally went inside, floating up the stairs to my apartment, I felt lighter than I had in years. My phone buzzed with a text as I was checking on sleeping Max. "Already counting the hours until I see you again. Sleep well, Parker." I fell asleep that night with a smile on my face, hope blooming bright in my chest for the first time in longer than I could remember. Things were going well, better than well actually. Austin and I were officially together now, though we'd agreed to keep things quiet at the office to avoid complications. Max was thriving with the additional attention and stability. I was happier than I'd been in years, and for the first time in a long time my life felt steady rather than like I was constantly one crisis away from collapse. But then, as life has a way of doing, everything tilted sideways in a single night. It was 2 in the morning when I woke to the sound of Max crying, a pitiful whimpering that immediately sent my parental instincts into overdrive. I rushed to his room and found him burning up with fever, his little body radiating heat that scared me senseless. The thermometer read 103 degrees. Panic clawed at my throat as I tried to remain calm, sponging him with cool water, checking the temperature again and again as if the numbers might change if I just looked enough times. Max was crying, my baby was crying and clearly miserable, and I felt absolutely helpless. I called his pediatrician's emergency line, but they couldn't see him until morning and advised me to monitor him closely or go to the emergency room if it got worse. My hands were shaking as I made the decision. This was bad enough that I wasn't going to wait. I started gathering things for the hospital, throwing essentials into a bag with trembling fingers when I realized I couldn't do this alone. Not this time. Without overthinking it, I grabbed my phone and texted Austin. Max has a high fever. Really high. Taking him to the emergency room now. I didn't expect a response at this hour, figured he'd see it in the morning and maybe check in then. But 15 minutes later, there was a sharp knock on my door. Austin stood in my hallway, slightly disheveled in jeans and a hastily pulled-on sweater, his hair mussed from sleep, but his eyes were alert and focused. "Let's go," he said simply, no questions asked. No hesitation in his voice. He'd driven across town in the middle of the night because I'd needed him. The realization made my chest tight with emotion I didn't have time to process. Austin drove while I sat in the back seat with Max wrapped in a blanket, trying to comfort him as he whimpered and clung to me. The emergency room was bright and sterile and filled with that particular hospital smell that always made anxiety spike. But Austin was there through all of it, through the check-in process, through the wait that felt eternal, through the examination and tests and more waiting. He sat beside me in those uncomfortable plastic chairs, his presence solid and reassuring, occasionally getting me coffee or water, making sure I ate something from the vending machine even though I insisted I wasn't hungry. When the doctor finally came out to tell us that Max had a viral infection, that it was treatable, that he'd be fine with medication and rest, something inside me broke. All the tension I'd been holding, all the fear I'd been suppressing so I could stay functional and take care of my son, came flooding out in a wave I couldn't control. I started crying right there in the hospital corridor, big ugly sobs that I couldn't seem to stop. Austin immediately pulled me into his arms, holding me tight against his chest while I fell foul. "It's all right," he murmured into my hair, his hand rubbing soothing circles on my back. "Max is going to be fine. You're going to be fine. I'm right here." And in that moment, with my face pressed against his sweater and his steady heartbeat under my ear, I understood with perfect clarity what I'd been too afraid to fully acknowledge before. This wasn't just attraction or companionship or convenience. This was love. I was completely, terrifyingly, undeniably in love with Austin Cross. The drive home was quiet. Max finally sleeping peacefully in his car seat after the fever reducer had started working. And I watched Austin's profile in the dim light from passing street lamps. He looked tired but content, like being here with us was exactly where he wanted to be. Back at my apartment, we got Max settled into bed with his new medication schedule written out, and I walked Austin toward the door, not wanting him to leave but knowing he must be exhausted. "Austin," I said softly, making him pause and turn back to me. "Thank you, not just for tonight but for everything you've done for us." He stepped closer, reaching up to cup my face in both his hands, his thumbs brushing away the dried tear tracks on my cheeks. "Parker, you don't need to thank me. Being here for you and Max isn't something I do out of obligation. This is where I choose to be. This is what I want." I looked into his eyes, saw the honesty there, and finally let myself believe it completely. "I love you," I whispered, the words falling out before I could second-guess them. Austin went very still, his breath catching audibly. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face, not his usual controlled expressions, but something genuine and unguarded and beautiful. "I love you too, Parker," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been in love with you for longer than you probably realize." He kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and I felt something shift and settle into place inside my chest. This was real. We were real. And maybe, just maybe, everything was going to work out after all. After Austin left, I checked on Max one more time, brushing his hair back from his forehead and feeling the relief of his cooler temperature. My phone lit up with a message. Get some sleep. I'll bring breakfast in the morning. I love you. I saved those 3 words to my favorites, reading them 3 more times before finally putting my phone down and climbing into bed, feeling like, despite the scary night, I was exactly where I was meant to be. In the weeks that followed our declarations, Austin and I officially acknowledged our relationship. We sat down with HR together because Austin insisted on doing everything properly, on making sure there were no ethical violations or conflicts of interest. There were forms to fill out, meetings to attend, and yes, there was gossip. The office rumor mill went into overdrive. I could feel the stares, hear the whispered conversations that stopped when I walked into a room. Some comments made their way back to me through well-meaning colleagues. Parker only got that promotion because he's sleeping with the CEO. This is obvious favoritism. I wonder how long before this falls apart and things get really messy. The words stung more than I wanted to admit, made me question whether I deserved my position, whether people would ever take my work seriously again. But Austin never let me feel alone in facing the judgment. During one particularly difficult meeting where a colleague made a thinly veiled comment about my recent project approval, Austin addressed it head-on with the kind of authority that reminded everyone exactly who was in charge. Parker received that project because his proposal was the strongest and most comprehensive of all submissions. I reviewed every single one blind before making my decision. If anyone has concerns about merit-based evaluation processes in this company, I'd be happy to discuss them in detail, privately. The room fell silent after that, but I felt conflicted about it later. That evening after we'd both left the office, I confronted him in the parking garage. You didn't have to do that. Now people are going to talk even more about favoritism and special treatment. Austin turned to face me fully, his expression firm and unyielding. I don't care what they say. I refuse to stand by silently while people undermine your abilities or question your accomplishments. You've earned everything you have through hard work and talent, and I won't allow anyone to diminish that. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made warmth spread through my chest. This was different from anything I'd experienced before. Someone actively choosing to fight for me, to stand beside me rather than expecting me to handle everything alone. Meanwhile, things at home were evolving too. Austin wasn't just visiting anymore, he was staying. His toothbrush appeared in my bathroom holder. His spare clothes found their way into my closet. He kept his laptop on my kitchen table. Max had started naturally referring to us as Papa Parker and Papa Austin, which made my heart simultaneously soar and ache with the weight of how much this all meant. One Sunday morning, the 3 of us were making breakfast together. Or more accurately, Austin and I were attempting to make pancakes while Max helped by stealing chocolate chips directly from the bag and getting flour on every possible surface. Papa Austin, are you going to live here forever? Max asked suddenly with that blunt curiosity only young children possess. Austin glanced at me, something unreadable flickering across his face, then crouched down to Max's level. Would you like me to stay? He asked gently. Max nodded enthusiastically, his whole face lighting up. Yes, you're the best. And you make Papa Parker smile lots. Austin's expression softened impossibly further. Then yes, buddy. I'm planning to stay. My throat felt tight with emotion. Such simple words, but they carried the weight of commitment and permanence and chosen family. Later, after Max had settled in front of his weekend cartoons, Austin pulled me aside into the kitchen with a serious expression that made my pulse quicken nervously. I meant what I said to Max. He started, taking both my hands in his. I want to be a permanent part of your lives. Both of you. I took a deep breath, hardly daring to hope he meant what I thought he meant. What exactly are you saying? A small smile tugged at his lips. I'm saying that if you're ready, I'd like to officially move in here. Or we could look for a new place together. Something bigger with space for all of us. Whatever makes you most comfortable. But I'm fully committed to this, Parker. To our relationship, to you, to Max. I'm not going anywhere. Tears pricked at my eyes because this was everything I'd secretly wanted but been too afraid to ask for. I'm ready, I managed to say past the lump in my throat. I want that too. Austin kissed me then, soft and tender and full of love. Good, because honestly, I can't imagine my life without you two in it anymore. That evening, after Max had gone to bed, we stood together on the small balcony of my apartment, the city lights twinkling below us, Austin's arms wrapped around my waist from behind. Did you ever imagine a random text message would completely change your life? I asked, leaning back against his solid warmth. Austin chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest into my back. Never. But I'm grateful Max sent it. Otherwise, I might never have found the courage to tell you how I felt. I probably would have just kept admiring you from a distance like a fool. I tilted my head back to look up at him. I'm grateful too, for all of this, for you. Austin pressed a kiss to my temple. We're building something real here, Parker. Something lasts. You, me, and Max. We're a family now. The word family settled warm and right in my chest. For so long it had just been Max and me against the world. Struggling and surviving and hoping for better days. Now we had Austin, solid and steady and choosing us every single day. Promise me something, I said softly. Austin's arms tightened slightly around me. Anything. Promise you'll tell me if this ever becomes too much. If the reality of instant fatherhood and all the complications that come with us gets overwhelming. I need to know you'll be honest rather than just enduring something you don't really want. Austin turned me around in his arms so we were face to face, his expression serious and intense. Parker, listen to me carefully. There is nowhere I would rather be than right here with you and Max. This isn't me enduring or settling or making the best of a situation. This is me actively choosing the life I want. You're not a complication, you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. His words, spoken with such conviction, finally dissolved the last remnants of my doubt. I kissed him deeply, pouring everything I felt into it. Love, gratitude, hope, commitment. When we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Austin rested his forehead against mine. I promise I'm in this completely, for the long haul, through everything. And I believed him. Because Austin Cross wasn't the type of man who made promises lightly. When he committed to something, he followed through with everything he had. As we stood there together under the stars, I realized this wasn't just a new beginning, it was the start of the life I'd always secretly dreamed of, but never thought I'd actually get to live. A life filled with love and partnership and family. Our family,